Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Last Wrestling Podcast. Because if I have a wrestling podcast, everybody else in the world does too, and the concept is officially dead. On the off chance you haven't been paying attention, the powers that be at New Japan Pro Wrestling have decided to unify the IWGP Heavyweight and Intercontinental Championships into one title officially christened the IWGP World's Heavyweight Championship. This will involve the creation of a new belt that may or may not debut at Sakura Genesis. And yes, I picked up my ticket for Sakura Genesis about, an hour or so before recording this. And with the current double gold champion Ibushi Kota being declared the first World's Heavyweight Champion, I think. In storyline, this whole thing is Ibushi's idea. He has said in promos that since exactly one person has challenged for the IWGP Intercontinental Championship in the year plus since the unification at Wrestle Kingdom 14, and even then only with the express intention of retiring the white belt, it's actually disrespectful to the title to keep it around as its own entity. By unifying the titles, he will, quote, protect, end quote, the histories of both belts. The reaction in the NJPW fan community has been negative to say the least. Most of the reactions I've seen, especially among Western fans, has been that this is unnecessary. Furthermore, they agree with the storyline beliefs of Tetsuya Naito, specifically that this is ending the lineages of both titles and creating a brand new championship that means exactly nothing. Now, while the IC title is only 10 years old, which in wrestling that seems like a long time, it really isn't, the IWGP Heavyweight Championship is the most prestigious belt in Japan, dates back over 40 years, and has been held by everyone from Antonio Inoki to Brock Lesnar to Bob Sapp for some reason. Lastly, there has been worry about the idea of a new belt. The IWGP Heavyweight Championship is probably the closest professional wrestling comes to a universally beloved belt design in the 21st century. Getting rid of it seems unnecessary at best and stupid at worst. And I'm here to tell you why all of that is complete crap. That's right, it's time for an unpopular hot take on the internet. I am 100% in favor of unifying the titles. First off, the too many belts problem. Even the most die-hard New Japan Pro Wrestling fans have generally admitted that the company has too many belts. Heavyweight singles, heavyweight tag, junior singles, junior tag, never six-man, US, and whatever titles from partner promotions, such as Ring of Honor, or Rev Pro, or whoever they're acknowledging this year. Well, that's a lot all added up. I've said before on this channel that a company has too many belts when the belts start to step on each other, by which I mean that every championship should be unique in terms of either who can wrestle for it or the rules under which it is contested. What was the difference between the IWGP Heavyweight and Intercontinental Championships? Both singles titles, both exclusive to the heavyweights, both contested under the exact same rules. I'm sorry, but these two titles stepped on each other hard. Look at the big picture of New Japan with the IC title out of the way. You now have 3 distinct divisions: heavyweight, junior heavyweight, and openweight, each division having 1 singles title and 1 tag team title. Yes, the openweight division is technically a trios title, but that's only a further distinction between the divisions, and more incentive to have a mix of heavyweights and juniors on the same team. So it fits the theme of the division. You also have the IWGP US Championship, which, thanks to, shall we say, logistical complications, is all but exclusive to the Strong Show. Keyword, exclusive. A US title that can only be defended in the US, at the moment, is more than distinct enough to avoid stepping on any of the Japan roster belts. Getting rid of the IC title solves New Japan's too many belts problem pretty much perfectly. Next, words matter. I've speculated ever since Wrestle Kingdom 15 that New Japan is in the middle of a generational shift as guys like Tanahashi, Suzuki, Okada, Naito, and all of the dads start to slow down and eventually either retire or take jobs in the US for better pay and less work. At the same time, New Japan is still committed to their international expansion plans. Obviously, the biggest problem is the pandemic and resulting travel restrictions at the moment, but once that fully dissipates, I expect the forbidden door to shatter into teeny tiny splinters. Both of these factors combine to justify the creation of a World's Championship. A generational shift could result in a new belt design, should result in a new belt design, but the international expansion means that NJPW needs a World's Heavyweight Championship. It may seem like a small detail, but that word, world, means the title is bigger than a simple heavyweight championship. While wrestling fans have called the IWGP title the top belt in the world for many years now, that is not what it says. It says it is the championship of the heavyweight division of the International Wrestling Grand Prix, which itself only covers one company in one country. Just adding the word world to the championship adds a significant amount of prestige to the belt and labels it as not just a Japan exclusive title anymore. An IWGP World title could be defended in Japan, America, Mexico, the UK, anywhere. It could also bring back a long-lost tradition of the Touring World's Champion that has not been properly seen since the heyday of the NWA. And Ring of Honor, MLW, and freaking Impact, heck, even the modern-day NWA, which doesn't have a platform or much of a roster at the moment, all have belts that they call the World Championship or World Heavyweight Championship. With all due respect to those promotions, arguing that their belts are more prestigious or cover more ground than the top title in New Japan is just absurd. New Japan is going to be a world company. They need a world's heavyweight title. And they were going to need new belts anyway. One of my favorite features of the IWGP heavyweight and junior heavyweight belts is the list of former champions on the side plates. It shows respect for history and establishes that once a champion, always a champion. It also contributes to New Japan's legendary sports-like presentation, in very big air quotes, as the engraving of former champions on a trophy is similar to what happens in other sports, such as the Stanley Cup, and probably the more direct inspiration for the New Japan belts, the Emperor's Cup in sumo, has the names of former winners on the base of the thing. Unfortunately, this has led to what I believe is the main impetus to create a new belt for the heavyweight title. Math! Okay, follow me here. Each side plate has room for 8 names. That's 32 names on 4 side plates, plus the reigning champion's name on the center plate. If the reigning champion is in his first reign, as Ibushi is now, his name is not added to the side plates until he eventually loses the title. Including Ibushi, and this is just going by Wikipedia, so, are we going to count Kurt Angle? No, we're not, that sort of thing. Including Ibushi, 31 wrestlers have held the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. Are we all starting to see the problem here? They are running out of room. Once Ibushi loses, there will only be space for 1 more name on the side plates. No more than 2 more first-time champions. In the middle of a generational shift with a whole new era of top stars who will eventually hold the top prize, that means New Japan has a few years at the absolute most before they run out of room and start having to take names off. With the whole point being to record the history of the title, that is simply not acceptable. They need a new belt. As of this writing, we do not know if the new IWGP World Heavyweight Championship will continue the tradition of the name record. More recent New Japan belts, such as Never, Intercontinental, and US, lack this feature. But I really hope they do. As for the IC title, no disrespect to the championship or anyone who has held it, but it's starting to look more than a little grubby, which is always the challenge with a white strap, unless you do what WWE does and keep different belts for TV and house shows, which, considering at this point New Japan is filming and posting most of their house or Road 2 shows, that's not something they could do if they wanted. So the belts tend to look like they've actually been worn, used, fought over, thrown into luggage, carried around, carried on a bus, carried through airports, etc. As good as that is, the damage does eventually begin to show, and it certainly has on the white strap of the IC title. As much as I love a white belt, the AWL Intercontinental title is white, for example, it does have a shorter shelf life than straps of other colors. Oh yeah, one more thing. Won't somebody please think of the shoulders? Okay, the NWA World Heavyweight Championship is frequently known as the 10 pounds of gold. New Japan looks at that and laughs in a polite Japanese way. Well, I can't find an exact number researching this. I have heard wrestlers such as Naito and Kenny Omega complain about how heavy the belts are in New Japan. In Naito's case, his first post-COVID or post-lockdown promo included him explaining that the reason he tended to drag the double gold behind him is because they're really freaking heavy. As for Omega, he once dropped the heavyweight belt getting into the ring at a Korakuen's show. He publicly apologized for this shameful act. He was a babyface at the time. But he did defend himself, saying that the belt was something like 20 pounds. Assuming the IC title is a similar weight, that's 40 pounds of weight on your shoulder. Add in the fact that Ibushi has frequently struggled to carry both of the titles, not just after a match where that can be explained as a combination of fatigue and selling, but on his way to the ring in the first place. He has trouble keeping both belts over his shoulders, as I hit my microphone. But we have a decent argument that one belt is just easier for the wrestlers to deal with. Even if it is very heavy, it's probably going to be lighter than the two put together. So that all added is why I think a new belt is justified. So let's take a look back at the arguments against it. First and foremost, title history. This is Naito's big argument. Ibushi has said he wants to protect the history of both belts. Naito has called bullshit, saying new title, new lineage. First off, new belt does not necessarily equal new lineage. New Japan Pro Wrestling has had multiple belt designs before, including 4 for the heavyweight title, and it's always been considered the same championship. So just the fact that there's a new belt, that doesn't make the argument for me. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that this unification does include a reset. Is it possible to do that and respect the history of the titles that make up the World's Heavyweight Championship? Well, to quote a much funnier and much more successful YouTube channel, super easy, barely an inconvenience. Just keep the names on the belt. Okay, here's what I need you to do. Either add larger or more side plates, say 4 side plates on each side for a total of 8. 6 in gold, large enough for 10 names each, that will cover 30 former heavyweight champions and leave room for 30 more, including Ibushi. And then you have the other 2, 1 on each side, in silver, with room for 7 names each to immortalize the 14 men who held the IWGP IC title. Or, alternatively, and this is assuming a very, very big belt here, put 2, on the center plate, put 2 rings around the center plate. 1 in silver with the names of the IC champions, and 1 in gold with the names of the heavyweight champions. And yes, very big belt, very tiny writing that's only going to be visible in close-ups. And that will leave the side plates, in this case you would have 2 of each, free for future World Heavyweight Champions. If the names stay on the belt, sorry, the history is maintained and respected. If it isn't, well, we'll see if they find another way to acknowledge it, but I think this is the easiest. Something else that Naito brought up that I want to talk about, and this is in the lead up to what has turned out to be the last ever IC title match. The only person who really cares about the white belt is slumming it in America right now. Over a year of double gold and nobody challenged for the IC title until Naito decided to retire it because nobody cared. Yeah, I'm not convinced anybody cares about the Intercontinental Championship. Frankly, I don't think the fans care, either beyond the cool factor of one wrestler carrying 2 belts, which is a visual that has clear diminishing returns, although this is where people would normally bring up the Wrestle Kingdom 8 issue, where the IC title was voted to be the main event over the heavyweight title. Yeah, well, I submit to you that this wasn't because of the Intercontinental Championship, but because, at the time, Nakamura and Tanahashi was a bigger match than Okada and Naito. And this was, of course, January of 2014, and yeah, that was 7 freaking years ago. With that one exception, the IC title has been a mid-card belt almost its entire life. It became superfluous the second the whole "this is the Gaijin belt" concept was abandoned, and again, wisely so. It lost all of its prestige the day Nakamura left, breaking the lineage of the title in doing so, and it became an afterthought the second it was unified into the double gold. While I think Naito defending each championship separately, as apparently was the intention, pre-pandemic of course, I think that could have worked if they had established some rules for who challenges for what. Perhaps the IC belt is defended against all comers. All you have to do is come out at the end of the show, say, "I want a shot at the belt. How about you and I do it?" The standard New Japan, a random challenger appears routine. And that gets you an IC title shot. However, heavyweight title shots must be earned, either by winning a tournament, beating the champion in the G1, pinning the champion in a tag or non-title singles match, etc. You could do that. You could separate the rules of the titles if they'd wanted to. But that just didn't wind up happening. It was a nice idea while it lasted, but the IC title has outlived its usefulness as a storytelling tool, and it's time to let it go, guys. It's time to let it go. Getting back to the issue that I completely understand where people are coming from, even though I don't agree. The new belt, the idea of replacing the iconic, the gorgeous, the beautiful IWGP heavyweight title with a new championship. This isn't WWE. They're actually good at this. I think this is the crux of most people's objections. They don't trust New Japan Pro Wrestling to not screw up the debut of a new belt. But why? Sure, most of the new belts that we've seen in the last few years or so have been various flavors of botched. People hated the WWE Universal Championship so much it ruined an entire pay-per-view. The most recent WWE Intercontinental title was just unnecessary. The current WWE United States Championship is fine, just fine. The WWE 24/7 title has been a complete disaster from the word go. The AEW World title, did you think I was going to let AEW off the hook here? No. The AEW World title was introduced in a mini tournament that had to be rewritten on the fly and frankly didn't make much sense. The AEW Women's title looks like it was made for an action figure, and the AEW TNT Championship literally wasn't finished when they debuted it. Oh, and neither Impact nor ROH have debuted a good new belt in the last 10 years or so, with the possible exception of the ROH Pure title, which was just bringing back an old design, so I'm not going to count it. Yeah, most new belts suck. But this isn't any of those companies. This is New Japan Pro Wrestling. The last belt they introduced was the IWGP United States title, and it's gorgeous! In fact, I don't really think they've ever had an ugly belt. I mean, maybe the Never belts are the closest, but even those aren't that bad. I know everybody loves the IWGP Heavyweight Championship, so do I. In fact, to be honest with you, I'd be happy if they kept the same basic design and just added the word world sort of under the lion mark and above the world heavyweight on the title, and just added the extra side plates that I mentioned earlier and called it a day. But if not, if they do introduce a whole new belt design, I trust New Japan Pro Wrestling to get something this important right. Now, if they do manage to screw it up, I'll be the first one to say I was wrong. Until then, I think Gedo and the rest of the New Japan brass have earned enough of our respect as fans to let them tell their story before we start raining down the hate. This has been the Last Wrestling Podcast. Please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me how wrong I am. Until next time, catchphrase sign off.